I know what everybody's probably thinking. Eric, are you already back in China? No, I'm not back in China. I'm in Costa Rica right now. And that's what's made my next video about EB5 take a little bit longer than expected. But today I'm gonna do it because it's been a rainy, miserable day here in ¿Qué pas? I think that's how you say it. In my previous video on EB5 investment, I gave an overview of the business of US immigration via investment. There's a lot of terminology and concepts in that first video that I've already explained, so you should probably go back and watch that first in order to get a better understanding of what I'm talking about in this video. In that video, I pretty much gave an overview of the EB5 industry and what it looks like from a holistic perspective. Today, I'm going to talk about what it's like to actually work in the industry in China as an American man. Just like in my previous video, I need to remind you that I left the business in late 2016. I did a few things off and on into 2017, but I really was out of the business in total by the mid 2017, I would say. Things have changed a lot since then. My memory is not 100% accurate, but I will do my best once again to portray everything exactly how I remember it. The first thing we're going to do is start with the EB5 investors. The most important thing to know about EB5 investors is that their 500,000 US dollars or 1 million US dollars of capital has to have been acquired by legal means. This means that when they apply for their EB5 visa, they have to show a proof of income or a proof of the source of funds. It doesn't have to be income. Only the $500,000 investment capital needs to be proven, not a penny more, and obviously not a penny less. It has to be $500,000. You're gonna soon find out that actually when you invest in EB5, it's gonna cost you quite a bit more than $500,000, but all the extra fees, like lawyer fees and stuff we'll talk about later, that doesn't have to be proven to be acquired through legal means. They can have a job that earned them $500,000, and then technically they could have also been a hitman or a drug dealer or something else for their other money.
Yeah, some told me to bring a lot of weed, man.
So yeah, you only have to prove $500,000. Chinese currency is very highly regulated. Every single Chinese citizen is only allowed to transfer 50,000 US dollars or buy 50,000 US dollar equivalent of foreign currency each year. Clearly, if you're making a 500,000 US dollar investment, it's going to be very difficult to take $500,000 and transfer it to a company in America, for example, for an EB5 project, if you only can do $50,000 per year. It'll take you 10 years just to accumulate the funds and transfer it out of the country. So from my experience, this means that most investors, they're gonna find 9 other family members or friends. They're gonna transfer $50,000 each from Chinese renminbi to US dollars to a regional center or a project in America. So now we gotta talk about how to prove your source of funds. Well, in China, especially like in the 90s and early 2000s, as Chinese wealth grew pretty much exponentially, people went from poor, farmers or whatever to very wealthy people. During that transition, there wasn't a lot of like really solid record keeping, especially when it comes to like individuals keeping track of like pay slips from the year 2000 or what they paid in taxes or whatever. You don't have a lot of solid proof of that stuff. So what this means is that a lot of Chinese EB5 investors would technically have a really tough time to prove their source of income was acquired legally. And to be fair, I would argue that probably quite a few EB5 investors actually did source their income maybe in less than legal ways. So for at least a not insignificant number of EB5 investors paying for an EB5 visa, let's just say it's a way to either safeguard their capital, safeguard their money by getting it out of the country, or to safeguard themselves by getting themselves out of the country, or just maybe just to launder some money, and then also you get an EB5 visa out of it. Now, I don't have any proof whatsoever that any of our clients were involved in any illegal activities or were laundering money, but I will say that quite a few of our investors had what I would call maybe a shaky proof of their source of funds. But thankfully for them, the USCIS, which adjudicates the EB5 visa applications, when you apply for the visa, they only need to find that a preponderance of the evidence is likely to be true. What this means is that the burden of proof on the applicant is not very high. It's not like a criminal case where it's beyond reasonable doubt. It seemed like it would be very easy for an applicant to just come up with like basically any old reason for where their money came from. Really, it could be anything from like a sworn affidavit from their previous employer that you earn this much money over, a period of 8 years or something like that. Or it could be, let's say the applicant can say, I got a gift from my parents and my parents earned money for 20 years and all of their 20 years of combined income amounted to $500,000 and they gifted that money to me. And so they get an affidavit from their parents that says this, and it says how much money they earned as a farmer or whatever, in the 90s in China. The proof doesn't really have to be very convincing proof. Another way that a lot of investors would prove their $500,000 is They would basically just get an appraisal, let's say on their condo or their apartment in Shanghai or any other tier 1 city for that matter. And then they would take out a loan against the value of that property, like a second mortgage. Now, from my understanding, from what I've seen, USCIS would never do like forensic accounting of an applicant's, whole financial history. The more proof that you could add to an application would obviously increase your odds of getting your visa approved. And quite often, USCIS, after they would receive your first application for your EB-5 visa, they would ask for more evidence, and a lot of times it would be about the proof of funds. But I would say that just getting like a couple additional like affidavits to support where the money came from is usually enough to get your EB-5 visa approved. It's not like they wanted like real pay stubs and tax receipts and all this stuff going back 20 years to, late 90s China or anything like that. They weren't looking for that. Pretty much, if you had any kind of story that could be somewhat plausible, you would get approved, or at least this wouldn't disqualify your application. I personally did see applications that I would say were too good to be true, their stories, but they still got approved. So I suppose with a visa like this, where your main purpose as a country is to just get capital into America, get money into America, and have new infrastructure or new developments going on. All that matters is the money, really. The money talks, right? So there weren't like United States immigration officers like boots on the ground in China chasing down leads about where the money came from. It could have came from anywhere. So another thing that applicants had to do was they had to disavow any relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. In China, it's pretty much necessary if you want to get ahead to join the Communist Party. If you want to move up in rank in a company, get a promotion, you generally have to be a party member. I would say probably like middle management all the way through the top of every company, they're all official card-carrying members of the Chinese Communist Party. This doesn't mean they're government officials or politicians or anything like that. It really just means that they went through the process of applying for Communist Party membership. They had another Communist Party member refer them or recommend them, and they had to do some training and pass some tests, and then they become a Communist Party member. In China, you really need guanxi. It means like a relationship or connections. You need that in China to get ahead, to get promotions. And to get guanxi in your company or between other networks of business people, you're gonna have to be a Communist Party member for the most part, not always. But according to American government regulations, if you want to become a green card holder or a US citizen, the quote is you cannot have been a member of any Communist Party or totalitarian organization. They do, however, have room for some exceptions, like if you were coerced, for example, into joining a Communist Party or a totalitarian organization. Another exception is if you were forced to join a Communist Party for employment reasons. So since most of the EB-5 applicants that I dealt with, and probably most people in the EB-5 industry dealt with, were members of the Communist Party, what that means is that we pretty much always had to include a letter that was in English and Chinese. So it would be written in Chinese and then translated and notarized in English, that disavows any relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. And since there are only really limited exceptions to the rule, like I just mentioned, almost every letter basically is like a form letter. The letters would read like basically like my name was a former member of the Communist Party of China. I was forced to join the Communist Party of China under threats of violence from my boss or promised better employment by my boss. America accepted that. So to be honest, we pretty much just, like I said, they're like a form letter. So we basically wrote them ourselves for our client, and then the client would say, yep, sounds good, sign their name, and then it would get stamped and notarized. So the reason that I tell you these couple things and about like the gerrymandering for the targeted employment areas in the last video, most everything else in this video is that what I believe is that the whole situation is kind of maybe like farcical. So when I was in China doing this work, my real life impression was that America, the government, we really didn't seem to care that much as long as the money was coming in, right? Sure, a lot of times like applications would be initially denied. They wouldn't get denied, it was just, they'd ask for more evidence and you can amend your application. And each time you apply and amend your application, you have to pay more money, of course, to the federal government for these to process this paperwork. My feeling was that it didn't really matter if the money was sourced legally or not. It didn't really matter if the applicant was a communist or not. As long as they, Scouts honor, my money's clean and I'm not a communist anymore, we roll out the red carpet for these people. Just like we really didn't care from the last video I mentioned if 10 jobs were actually really created or if it was actually in a rural or an economically disadvantaged area. Nothing really mattered. They're not sticklers about anything. If they really did take like a really serious look at every applicant, I think they would probably ultimately end up denying a higher percentage of applicants. And that would adversely affect, the developer. It would adversely affect the American economy. It would have, you know, bad knock-on effects for the EB-5 visa program in general. We would get less applicants and maybe the program would even die. And if you remember from the last video, again, this program really took off after 2008. It was more like 2010, 2011, when we're still really reeling from the economic crisis of 2008. So I'm not trying to criticize the US government again when I say like, oh, it wasn't really like looked at super closely who these people were or where their money came from. I think that if we wanted the program to succeed and wanted America to be revitalized, at least during that time, we really couldn't have been sticklers about really the rules and the legalities of everything. It all just kind of felt like, I don't know, a song and dance or a dog and pony show, or I don't know what the expression is, because my English is getting really bad the longer I live outside of America. But it just all seemed kind of like a farce. Like it was just like, okay, apply, say where the money came from, say you're not a communist. Because the government really didn't like make sure everything was on the up and up at all times, but they still would like send questions about the application or ask you to resubmit it. I don't know, it's like they look like they're doing something, but in the end, they really didn't. They just, you know, if it looks okay, it looks good enough, there's a preponderance of the evidence that is likely to be true, then okay, welcome into America. The integrity of the program really wasn't that great. Like nobody really looked too hard at it, which is why in a lot of cases there was fraud. So basically what my opinion is of the whole entire program is what they should have done is that made it easier to get your approval, make it faster, increase or completely X the limits on visas, because there was only 10,000 in a year, and it really slowed down the amount of business that we could do, because there was a huge long line of people that wanted EB-5 visas and there was a backlog. So they shouldn't have even had a limit on the visas. They shouldn't have really asked too many questions. They just said, you have the money, the project, a real project, and are you a criminal? Okay, no, then let them in, you know, I don't care. Let as many immigrants in as they want. I know that probably most Americans would rather have wealthy, rich, good immigrants as opposed to, you know, refugees and poor people that are just trying to jump over the border. You know, for me, I don't care. I say let everybody in, but let's not go there in this video, okay? Anyway, America has plenty of space. If people want to come here and invest their money here, why only 10,000 every year, right? Why not have 20,000 or 100,000 or as many rich people as we can, you know? Make America the true playground for the wealthy. Make it like Monaco. All right, so that was a little tangent. Sorry about that. Now I'm really gonna get into like the day-to-day of my job. So I worked in Shanghai. It was kind of a typical office in Shanghai. It wasn't a brand new high-rise office tower. It was more like a mid-2000s Chinese office tower, which if you've been to China and worked in China, you know these buildings where they're probably 20 or 30 stories high. Their lobby is in an atrium is not very big. The elevators are very, very, very slow and small, and they're serving, you know, 20 stories up, and there's only 2 elevators, and everybody's in there smoking their cigarettes. You know, it's changed now, but back in 2012, we had like a cup, like a Red Bull can with the lid torn off, and that was just placed inside the elevator, like on the handrail, so people would smoke and they'd ash their cigarette in there, throw their cigarette in there. So that was the kind of office tower that we were in. You know, I usually took the stairs because we weren't very high up. People in China, they'll wait like for the elevator for 15, 20 minutes in the morning, and when they get off work, because there's only 2 elevators and they're very small and it's an old building and they're slow, but maybe, you know, you're on the 3rd or the 4th floor, you can easily walk up those steps for most people. Not to be ableist here, but so it was crazy that all my coworkers would be getting there to work 15 minutes early. I think we started at 9:30, and those people would all stand there. I could see them waiting in line. The line would be like out the door of our building basically, and I just walk on past right like at 9:28, 9:29, and I'd be there right on time because I'd walk up the stairs. Our office was pretty dingy. It wasn't, you know, very nice. It was kind of dark and drab. When I was there, anywhere from 12 to 15 employees working in the office. We did really have a really nice meeting room with a huge, big, heavy wooden table and like a carpeted floor and pictures on the walls and books, and it was a really nice room. 2 bosses, they both had really nice offices for themselves, and the air was really stale, and I would often have like headaches and be lightheaded just from sitting in there all day. I had 2 bosses, they were both attorneys, and then there was also a couple other attorneys that worked in there, and then like a paralegal and a secretary, and me and some other kind of random people. So that added up to about 12. Day to day, my general job was kind of varied. I was the business development manager for our company. I would be looking up industry news. I was the only native speaker of English. Most EB5 industry news is in English. So any new developments I would be looking for every day. There are EB5 newsletters you can follow and subscribe to, that sort of thing. I would also be creating business plans or proposals for business plans. Like, for example, I would look at a targeted employment area that we perhaps want to do business in. I might be contacting the regional center that operates in that targeted employment area, ask them about like what the fee is, or if we can use their regional center, because some regional centers, you know, maybe they won't let you use their regional center. I might call up a regional center and I say, hey, I want to use your tea. Can I use it? And they'll say, what kind of business are you doing? And I'll say, well, I'm planning on doing a senior citizen facility. And then they might say, oh, we already have, you know, a senior citizen facility being put in as an EB5 project. Is there something else you want to do? That sort of thing. Not really very complicated or exciting, but that was my day-to-day job. And I would also create like PowerPoint decks about our projects that we are pitching, or if I have a business plan that I want to pitch to my boss, like I want to say, let's build a microbrewery in Chicago, and he'll say, okay, well, pitch it to me. How is it going to create jobs? Where is it going to be? How much money are we going to make? All this stuff. And I'd research it and write a plan, and he'd say yes or no. Generally, he'd say no. After I left, I think they did end up using one of my business plans. But for the most part, when I was there for like the 4 years, we already had EB5 development in the works. Mainly, we were selling shares in those companies. As one would complete, then we'd start pitching the next one, and it would just roll over. But we already had, when I got there, like 3 or 4 already lined up, and they take a few years each. So yeah, after I left, they did one of mine, and I think it's still there. I think it's in business, so I think I wrote a pretty good plan. It helps when you get free capital, right? It was fully funded by EB5 money, so hard to fail when you don't have any obligation to pay anybody back, and all your money is you've got for free, basically. So like I just said, we would generally only be like selling one project at a time. So I would say we were generally kind of overstaffed. I think a lot of offices in China are overstaffed. Labor has traditionally been very cheap in China, so we might have like 2 or 3 people doing the same job. I was the only white guy doing my job, but there was a lot of times in the office where we're just all sitting around on like QQ back then, like QQ group chat for the office, and we're just talking and typing, and people are taking naps, and that's just normal for Chinese offices. But that's how I learned Chinese for the most part. Is when I first got to China, I was always on QQ group chat, and the whole office was chatting all the time, and I would just copy and paste, and that's why I can read Chinese a lot better than I can speak Chinese. I know in the title of the previous video, I said that I sold green cards. I can't strictly say that this is accurate because EB5 projects are classified as securities by the SEC. What this means is that in order to sell a security, you need to be a broker or like a registered agent. So I wasn't that, so I can't really say that I did sell green cards personally. We basically had a full-time agent that didn't work in our office, but he worked for us. So when we'd have a project that we want to find investors for, what we would do is we'd introduce the project to agents, and then the agents, if they liked it, they would try to sell the project. And to be honest, agents, they would take any project because every project was a gold mine. In those days, like I said, it was so easy to sell EB5 projects. So they would take anything, you say, hey, I have a project for you, say, okay, I'll go sell it. So these agents, they would sell the projects basically in one of 2 ways, main ways. The most significant way that they would sell EB5 projects, I would say, is to unsophisticated investors. These investors were typically like a middle manager in some company. They really didn't acquire their wealth through like being a businessman or an entrepreneur, or even from like a high salary in their company, because even a middle manager back then in like 2010, 11, they maybe were only making like 15,000 RMB a month. So it would take forever to acquire $500,000. Most of this kind of investor, they got their money just because China, became so fabulously wealthy. The Chinese economic miracle that happened, a rising tide raised all ships. And what I mean by that is they became wealthy basically like on paper through ownership of property. Like if they lived in a tier 1 city like Shanghai, or even tier 2 like Hangzhou or Suzhou, if they owned a property like in the year 2000, maybe it's some little tiny 45, 50 square meter apartment in a commie block, but then that place gets torn down, and in its place they build a giant office tower, or they build a huge brand new luxury residential community. Well, those people that own the space that was the apartment that was already there, the Chinese government might have given them 2 apartments to replace the one that they lost. They might not be in the exact same location, maybe they're on the suburbs or something. But if you have an apartment in Shanghai and it's just like a crap old apartment from like the 60s or 70s or 80s or whatever, and then it gets torn down, and then they give you 2 new apartments in Shanghai, and then the price of apartments in Shanghai through the roof, well, now you're suddenly a millionaire for doing absolutely nothing except being born in Shanghai. And that's how it happened for a lot of people. As everybody that's paying attention to China right now knows, there's like a glut of property. There's a huge oversupply, and it can be quite difficult in some cities, some places, to sell a home that you own. So your home might be valued at $500,000, but in reality, you might not be able to sell it for that. But if the bank says it's $500,000 and writes you a loan for that, and you go and apply for an EB-5 visa, you know, now you got a green card, and that's just how it goes. So for these kind of investors, the unsophisticated investor, we usually met them in groups, usually like in a function room at a bank or a hotel. So what I would do is I would travel all around China, generally with an agent or a group of agents, and also like my boss. And what we'd do is like a sales pitch for a project, right? Basically like a timeshare salesman is what I felt like. So we'd have a group of investors, maybe 20 investors, and I'd go up and do a PPT about our company. And I'm not selling the project, I'm not selling a security. So I might just pitch about our company, what we do, our history, where we're from, blah, 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 all the basic, like really boring crap. And then an agent would go up there and he would sell the project and he would say, you know, this is how much it's going to cost you and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, and that was the story. That was how it went. At the end of that pitch, especially during the real boom years, you know, if there's like 20 potential investors in that room, at the end of the pitch, you might sell 10 EB5 visas, basically. You might sell 10 shares in the project at one time. Like, people are ready to sign on the dotted line right away because they're worried about maybe getting into the 10,000 visa backlog or losing out on this project and having to wait for another project. So it was really easy at that time to sell EB5 projects. You know, one other thing I should say is during these kind of meetings, usually I would present myself as like a high up in the company. I just flew in from America. I landed here in like Suzhou or Hangzhou or whatever. And I just came here to meet with you guys today to tell you about this company and this exciting opportunity. At that time in China, just being like a white guy, you got a lot of face and people would really appreciate that. They loved a good story. So we'd always tell them a good story. Even though I was working in Shanghai and living in Shanghai. Eric here, he just flew in from San Francisco just for you. And they'd be like, oh wow, great. Another thing about, you know, when you lie to people as a salesperson, usually you're lying to like increase the pressure. You're putting pressure on these people. Buy, buy, buy. You have to buy now. The opportunity is not going to be here anymore. This guy came here just for you. Buy, 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 buy. And so, you know, this is why I'm not a good salesman and why I never was a salesman in any job I've had, is because like, I'm not saying like I'm too ethical or anything like that, but like, I just can't lie to people about this stuff. It's like, I feel really, really bad. Good salespeople, they don't feel bad. They get on you like a hawk and they get you to buy. So that's basically what I was doing. I was mostly in the office, but I was also traveling around China quite a bit, meeting with wealthy people. And it was actually a really fun job for a couple of years. Now, I told you guys I would answer questions if you left it on the previous video. So Mike left a comment, he was asking about money, like how much you can get paid doing this. So I will say that since I wasn't a registered agent, I wasn't a broker, I couldn't actually sell and I couldn't collect agent fees. But my job, like as the face of the company from America, representing this and being there when they are selling these projects, that does add value to the investor and it adds a lot of value for the agent trying to sell the project. It makes it a lot easier for them to sell the project. So if I was there, Mike, like lending credibility to this project as a white American dude, it added value. Now every agent, you know, they might be individual or they might be with a company and they might have different fees. I would say they're usually around $15,000 to $20,000 per EB5 investor the agent gets to sign up for. So for every $500,000 invested, an agent would collect, you know, $15,000 agent fee. So with some of the agents, especially the main one that I have talked about a couple of times, we had a really good relationship. We had guanxi, we had connections, we would hang out quite a bit, not just through work, but out of work. This is the way business is done in China. And so most agents, if there was a person like me on the job, they would, once they collect their agent fee, their $15,000 or whatever, they might kick down like a kickdown for me, a kickback. Obviously it wouldn't be that much, but it would be okay. And most of them would take care of somebody like me that was there helping them. Obviously I didn't make as much money as I would have wanted to, but I made okay money doing that. Everyone knows the deal in China. There's always people, you know, scratching each other's backs or greasing palms or whatever. That's just how it goes. I would also say that my bosses were very, very wealthy, especially one boss I had. I went with him to Chase Bank in Chicago, like the private high net worth individual bank, and in his personal account, I remember he had something like $40 million or something ridiculous. And when we went to the Chase Bank, like he lives in China, he's hardly ever in Chicago, and we go to Chicago and we walk into the private area for the clients, and everybody knows his name. I'm like, you haven't even been here in 6 months. How does everybody know who you are? But I guess when you have 30 or 40 million dollars in the bank in your personal account, and you also have business accounts and stuff, then people remember your name and they take care of you. That's how I learned what it's like to be a high roller with a bank. They also like give you coffee and all. I mean, you have $40 million, who cares if you get a free coffee? But you know what? They take care of people. They take care of rich people. You know, if you have no money and you overdraft, then they charge you 15 bucks. But that 15 bucks, you know, that buys coffee for my boss and for me, and maybe a scone. So thanks, Chase. I appreciate that. So yeah, so they were quite wealthy, like I said, and I had a pretty decent salary. I'm not gonna tell you how much I earned, but it was pretty good. And then we also got obviously annual bonus. Everybody in China, any job gets an annual bonus at Chinese New Year. Like, and every time we closed a project, like let's say we had a project with 60 investors, you know, so a $30 million project. Once we got all the investors in, my boss would always, of course, give us like a bonus and a kickback just for closing a project. So everything was good, you know. If my boss makes $30 million on a project, it's not all profit, of course, but you know, I think we'd all revolt if he didn't give us money. So sorry, I'm not super explicit about like how much we're talking. I don't really want to get into it, and this video is already really long, way longer than I expected. So I'll do another video in the future about like retirement and retiring early and how I got here and what my plans are in the future. So I guess if you're not already subscribed, Mike and whoever else, subscribe and look forward to that. So the other kind of investor we had would be, I would say, the sophisticated investor. These were really generally more interesting types of investors. I probably have quite a bit less to say about them because we hardly ever would encounter them. So usually a sophisticated investor in my category is like a real businessman, a real entrepreneur, somebody with real money. Now, I remember one investor that really stood out to me. I'll briefly talk about him. I remember I was told that we're gonna go meet him in the top of a skyscraper in Shanghai, one of the new skyscrapers, really famous one, popular one, and has a nightclubs and restaurants, everything you could expect. You know, one of the best, most famous buildings in Shanghai. And we were told, or I was told, that this guy is the owner or CEO of the company that developed that real estate project, and they have a lot of other real estate projects, of course, as well. So we went to the very top of this skyscraper in Shanghai, and generally when you meet like rich people in China and have meetings with them, generally they have like a posse, like a group of people around him, like at least an assistant. But we went to meet this guy at the top floor of this building. He was the only person that was there. It was me and my boss and an agent, and we were just selling the project to this one guy, and he sat across from us by himself, and he didn't say anything for the whole time. Like, he introduced himself, of course, and then we pitched it. And usually, like, if you're in a table having a meeting with somebody, they might interrupt, they might have questions, you know, but we did our pitch and he didn't say anything. And he sat there and I remember he had his hands like this the whole time on the table and he was just looking at us. And after we were done, like, he didn't say anything for probably like 30 seconds. And my boss kind of had a funny, like a little nervous laugh that he would do. And he kind of under his breath, he's like, and he was like looking at me and I was looking at him. But then finally, probably after 20 or 30 seconds, that guy talked. And I don't remember exactly what he said. This has got to be 2013. But I just remember how deliberate he was. He waited and he thought and he didn't move his hands and he thought and he contemplated. And he asked a few questions. Yeah, I've never met a guy like that. I mean, I think that it's really interesting. It shows you, I mean, maybe it's just an act, but it does show you, you know, if you're thoughtful and you take your time, you don't rush into things, you know, you can maybe make a better decision or have more thoughtful questions. And in the end, he didn't invest. I know maybe at this point he has, I don't know, but with us, he didn't invest. So, you know, it's very different from the high pressure group timeshare tactic versus, you know, one-on-one or one-on-three, just in a meeting room by yourselves and dealing with a real powerful person. Very, very different kind of sales process, or not sales process. So one more story about EB-5 investors, agents, and being a Lawai. It might even be relevant to what's happening in like rural Chinese banks like Henan Bank Run. So there was a time when we were trying to get new clients from like rural banks in China. It was Henan and also Anhui, the two provinces we were really focused on. So like I said before, in China you need relationships to do business. So what we did is we went to a rural bank in Anhui. We met with the leader of the bank. Obviously, a leader of a chain of banks is going to have basically like a client list of who is a high net worth individual in my bank. And we wanted that list, or we wanted introduction to these people so we could try to sell them EB5 projects. So he had what we wanted. We want a list of people. Of course, he's not just going to give it to us. He expects something else in return, right? So the first time we went to Anhui to meet this guy, had dinner, we told him about EB5, blah, blah, blah. He took us to karaoke, KTV. We had a lot of drinks. You know, he gave us women. It's normal in China. I'm not gonna get into that in this one. Anyway, we were gifted with a lot of fun and lively activities and nighttime and vice and all that fun businessman stuff you do in Asia. So I know that he also wanted kickbacks and stuff, and I don't know what the actual final deal was or what actually happened. But we did end up going back to Anhui a lot, and he would always provide us groups of clients that we could try to pitch our projects to. So I'm sure that my boss was scratching his back and he was scratching ours. Another commenter asked about why the market has dried up in recent years. I think there's a lot of factors about this. The first and foremost is that the 10,000 visa annual limit created like a huge, massive backlog. There was really, really slow processing times already, and you add on a very long line. This meant that by the year 2016 or 2017, the conditional EB5 visa that you apply for initially, it might take 3 to 4 years just to get from after you apply. And so it's very hard to sell somebody, you know, a visa if it's gonna take, you give me $500,000 now, and you don't get what you want for 4 more years. And then once you get that, it might take another 5 more years for you to finally get your permanent residency status. You won't even be seeing a possible return on your investment for maybe 9 years, 10 years, who knows? Another thing is that the EB5 program now, the minimum cost is $800,000 instead of $500,000, so that's quite a bit more. And then pretty much COVID shut down USCIS or delayed processing times for a while. And then of course there was scams and fraud that I talked about a couple times. That was pretty good at scaring off some potential investors. During the time that I was still there, people were like, why would I give you money when you're probably just gonna steal it all from me? Which, fair enough, you know, fair play to them. Now, of course, most investors, they really, what they want is a green card for themselves and their family. They don't necessarily need a return on their investment. They want their money back, of course, but they're not necessarily gonna make a profit or even care. And you can't guarantee return on an investment. So yeah, I wanted to cover a lot more. I wanted to cover like some of the big fraud stories. But you know what? You can read articles about them. They're in the links. Or you can just Google EB5 fraud. This video is already like way too long and I'm tired now. Probably nobody's still here watching. If you are, appreciate it. So I'm gonna take a little break from EB5. Maybe if there are more viewers or questions after this one, again, leave them in the comments and I'll come back to EB5 in the future. But for now, I'm just gonna, you know, go enjoy Costa Rica a little bit. Thanks as always. I appreciate the support and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.